Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are doing something a little different today because we are looking at a brand that is arguably one of the most confusing paradoxical entities in American history.
Absolutely. I mean, you can walk into a mall in Dubai and buy a T-shirt with this logo on it.
You can. You can see it painted on the tail of a U.S. Navy aircraft.
It's everywhere.
It is. It's a symbol that represents, the sexual revolution, the girl next door, and this whole idea of democratizing nudity.
And yet, and this is the crazy part, when you look at the source material we have today, this same entity is responsible for serializing Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451.
Which is just wild.
It published Vladimir Nabokov, Margaret Atwood, Kurt Vonnegut. I mean, the list is staggering.
It was the platform where a future U.S. president admitted to having lust in his heart.
And where Martin Luther King Jr. gave one of the longest, most in-depth interviews of his entire career.
So we are talking, obviously, about Playboy. But I want to be clear right off the bat. This isn't a retrospective on, the glory days of the mansion.
No, not at all.
The sources we've pulled together paint a much, much grittier picture. We're going to look at how a kitchen table startup became a global empire, for sure. But we also really need to unpack the serious literary weight it carried, the very dark realities for the women who worked there, and the absolute nosedive the business took in the digital age.
It's a fascinating case study because it sits right on this cultural fault line. The magazine sold fantasy leisure, sophistication, sexual freedom.
Yeah, the good life.
Exactly. But the reality behind the scenes was often a grind of litigation, corporate maneuvering, and a constant struggle to keep up with the very revolution it helped start.
It's the business story that interests me the most, honestly.
Yeah.
Because when you think of Playboy, you think of the mansion, the grotto, the silk pajamas.
The whole Hefner persona.
You think of Hugh Hefner as this titan of industry. But looking at the origin documents, the start was incredibly scrappy. It wasn't some media mogul launching an empire. This was a guy who was flat broke.
It was so precarious. I mean, if you look at Hefner's resume in 1949, he's a psychology graduate from the University of Illinois.
Okay.
And he's kind of drifting a bit. He ends up working in Chicago as a copywriter for Esquire, which was, the premier men's magazine at the time.
Right, the gold standard.
But the job that really gave him the toolkit for Playboy is the one that always makes people laugh.
You're talking about children's activities.
I am.
I looked this up because I genuinely didn't believe it at first. The founder of the world's most famous erotic magazine cut his teeth working in circulation for a children's magazine.
It sounds like a joke, but it actually makes perfect sense.
It does, right. That's where he learned the mechanics of the subscription model.
Precisely. He wasn't there for the content. He was there learning the direct mail business. He figured out how to get people to subscribe and, more importantly, how to get them to renew.
So he took the business logic of this wholesome children's publication and just applied it to the adult market.
Completely. And by the spring of 1953, he had the whole concept mapped out. But here's the first major hurdle that almost killed the company before it even started.
The name. The name. Right. In the early drafts, it wasn't Playboy. He was completely obsessed with calling it Stag Party.
He was. He had even formed the corporation as HMH Publishing and was ready to go to print with Stag Party.
What happened?
Well, there was an existing men's adventure magazine called Simply Stag.
Uh-oh.
And it was published by a guy named Martin Goodman, who, and this is a great fun fact, was also the publisher behind what would eventually become Marvel Comics.
No way. So you have the future Marvel guy threatening to sue the future Playboy guy.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Goodman's lawyers sent a cease and desist letter saying, essentially, if you use the word stag, we will sue you into oblivion for trademark infringement.
And Hefner couldn't fight that.
No chance. In the 1950s, trademark law for publication titles was getting really strict. He knew he couldn't win a legal battle against a funded publisher. He had zero money for lawyers.
So he has to pivot. And this is where the story gets almost cinematic. He gathers his inner circle, his wife Millie, and his friend Eldon Sellers.
Right, and they just start throwing names at the wall.
I saw the list of rejected names in the notes, and they're very telling.
They're fantastic cultural artifacts, aren't they? They considered Top Hat, which feels very Fred Astaire, a bit dated even for 1953.
Very old-fashioned. Then there was Gentleman.
Which is just boring.
So boring.
Then they got weird with Satyr and Pan.
Satyr is a bold choice. I mean, naming your magazine after a mythological half-goat creature known for drunken debauchery It's a little on the nose, isn't it?
A little bit. It was too intellectual, maybe, too
Right.
focused on just the sexual appetite without any of the sophistication they were going for. They wanted something that implied, urbanity.
So who came up with Playboy?
It was actually Eldon Sellers. There was a defunct automobile company called the Playboy Motor Car Corporation, and Sellers' mother had actually worked for them for a short time. He just liked the ring of it.
It's amazing how much that one word changed the lexicon. Because before that, a playboy was kind of a derogatory term, wasn't it?
Oh, totally. It meant a rich wastrel, someone who just inherited money and didn't work.
A good for nothing.
Exactly. It was a slur for idle rich men. And what Hefner did, which was genius, was he reappropriated it. He turned the playboy into an aspirational figure.
A man who worked hard but played harder.
Right, a man who appreciated jazz and good wine and, of course, women. He turned a negative term into an entire lifestyle brand.
But to build that brand, he needed capital. And this is the part of the story that just blows my mind every single time I read it. The financing.
There was no venture capital.
No bank loan. Nothing.
He scraped together just over $8,000. That was it. He sold his furniture. He borrowed from everyone he knew.
But the most significant chunk of that money, $1,000, came from his mother.
His mother. A woman of that era, presumably a somewhat conservative Midwestern woman.
Handing her son $1,000, which is about $11,000 in today's money, to start a girly magazine.
The irony is just incredible. But Hefner always said his mother didn't believe in the magazine. She believed in him.
Wow.
It was a maternal investment in his potential, not the product. But that money, that $1,000, allowed him to print the very first issue, December 1953.
Produced on his kitchen table in Hyde Park, Chicago.
Literally on the kitchen table.
And the most famous detail about that first issue, the thing everyone knows, is that it doesn't have a day on the cover.
That's right. It just says Vol 1, no December. And that's because Hefner was genuinely terrified there wouldn't be a second issue.
He was hedging his bets.
Completely. He wanted to be able to keep it on the newsstands in January or February if it didn't sell out right away. He needed it to be evergreen because he was operating on such a razor-thin margin.
But it didn't sit on the shelves. It flew off them.
Yeah.
And we have to address the elephant in the room, or I guess the blonde in the room. The reason it sold wasn't the graphic design.
No.
It was Marilyn Monroe.
It was Marilyn. But the backstory of that centerfold is a real lesson in the economics of exploitation.
Because this wasn't a Playboy photo shoot.
Not at all. Hefner couldn't afford to hire Marilyn Monroe. By 53, she was already a huge star.
So how did he get the photo?
He bought the rights to a calendar image. It was a nude study she had done years earlier when she was a struggling actress named Norma Jean, posed on some red velvet.
So he just bought it from a third party.
He paid a calendar company about $500 for the rights to publish it.
And Marilyn, how much did she get from this?
From Playboy, zero. Nothing. From the original photo session years before, she'd been paid about $50.
$50.
So you have the launch of this multi-million-dollar empire built squarely on the back of a woman's image, for which she received effectively nothing. It established a dynamic that would really haunt the brand for decades.
Which is what?
Immense profit derived from female bodies, often with the women themselves seeing just a tiny fraction of the value they created.
Despite the, questionable ethics of it, the business tactic worked. The first issue sold 53,991 copies.
For a kitchen table startup, that is a grand slam home run.
An absolute sensation.
It was, and it proved the concept. There was a massive market for a magazine that combined erotica with a respectable package. But now that he had an audience, he needed the logo. He needed something to stick on the cover that said, "This is us."
Enter the rabbit.
The rabbit.
I've always found the choice of a rabbit so interesting because, okay, sure, breeding like rabbits, we get the joke.
Right, the obvious part.
But Hefner had a much more specific, almost philosophical reason for choosing it, didn't he?
He did. He gave this very telling interview to the Italian journalist Oriana Fallaci, where he completely deconstructed the rabbit. He said he chose it for the humorous sexual connotation, obviously.
Of course.
He described rabbits as fresh, shy, vivacious jumping, but the key was what he was contrasting it against.
Right. He was positioning it against the femme fatale image that was so popular in the noir films of the 40s.
Exactly. Hefner apparently hated the femme fatale, the mysterious, dangerous woman in lace and garters. He called that look mentally filthy.
Wow, okay.
He wanted the Playboy woman to be the girl next door. He said she should be naked, washed with soap and water and happy.
Which is a very sanitized, very suburban view of sexuality.
It is. It completely domesticated sex. It took it out of the shadowy brothel or the dark alley and put it right in your living room. And the rabbit, which was designed by Art Paul, captured that perfectly.
It was playful, not predatory.
And Art Paul sketched that logo in minutes, by the way.
I heard that.
It was meant to be a throwaway endnote for the second issue, but they realized pretty quickly it had this incredible graphic power.
It's one of the few logos in the world that is recognizable just by its silhouette. You don't even need the letters.
For sure.
And speaking of the logo,
Yeah.
we have to debunk a myth that I heard constantly in high school. The stars.
Oh, the stars on the cover, yes.
Everyone knew that the number of stars in the letter P on the cover rated the centerfold.
Or the more lurid version.
Was how many times Hefner had slept with her. Like 5 stars meant he really liked her.
That is the ultimate urban legend. And it really speaks to how much men wanted to believe they had some inside track on Hefner's private life.
So what was the reality?
The reality is remarkably boring. The stars, which appeared from about 1955 to 1979, were purely for distribution logistics.
No way.
Yeah, they just indicated which advertising region the magazine was for domestic, international, military, things like that. It was a code for the guys driving the delivery trucks, not a rating system for the women.
That's amazing. We create these huge mythologies around brands, and the truth is just paperwork.
It usually is.
But let's pivot now to the other side of the magazine, the whole I read it for the articles joke. Because when you look at the source material, there is a massive list of literary heavyweights. This wasn't just filler content between the pictorials.
No, and this was Hefner's strategy from the very beginning to avoid censorship. If he wrapped the nudity in high art, he could argue in court that the magazine had redeeming social value.
A legal shield.
But the quality of the work went so far beyond what was legally necessary. I mean, in 1954, just the second year of publication, they serialized Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451.
Which is just so incredibly ironic.
How so?
You have a story about burning books and the suppression of ideas, running in a magazine that was constantly being banned and hidden under mattresses.
The irony was likely very intentional. Bradbury was a legitimate sci-fi icon at the time, but just look at the rest of the roster.
It's insane.
Vladimir Nabokov, Margaret Atwood, Saul Bellow, Kurt Vonnegut, Haruki Murakami, Roald Dahl.
These are Nobel Prize winners and literary giants. Why were they publishing in Playboy?
2 reasons. 1, the pay was the best in the industry. They paid double, sometimes triple what the Atlantic or the New Yorker paid.
Money talks.
It does. And 2, Playboy didn't edit them heavily. It gave them an incredible amount of creative freedom. They could write what they wanted to write.
And then you have the interviews. The Playboy interview became its own genre.
It did. It was long-form journalism at its absolute best. You have Alex Haley, the author of Roots, interviewing Martin Luther King Jr. in 1965.
That interview is still cited by historians today.
Because King had the space, thousands of words, to really expound on his philosophy of nonviolence in a way that television sound bites just didn't allow.
But they also courted a lot of controversy. I mean, Haley also interviewed George Lincoln Rockwell,
the head of the American Nazi Party.
Yeah.
And that was a terrifying interview, but the editorial stance was that sunlight is the best disinfectant. They let him speak so people could see the hatred clearly for what it was.
I want to talk about the Jimmy Carter interview in 1976 because I think it's hard for modern listeners to understand how huge of a deal this was.
It was seismic. Just completely seismic. You have Jimmy Carter, a peanut farmer from Georgia, running as a devout, born-again Christian.
The moral majority is rallying behind him.
Exactly. And then he sits down with Playboy, which to that same voting bloc was the absolute symbol of moral decay.
And he drops the famous line.
The line that almost cost him the election. I've committed adultery in my heart many times.
He was trying to explain a theological concept, right?
He was trying to explain the Christian concept of sin, that the thought is as bad as the action, but the media just ran with Carter admits to adultery.
Wow.
It showed the immense cultural power Playboy held at the time. A presidential candidate felt he had to talk to that demographic to win.
And then there's the John Lennon interview.
Yeah.
This one gives me chills.
It is a haunting artifact. It was conducted with John and Yoko, this really long, in-depth conversation. It hit newsstands in January 1981.
Right.
But John was murdered on December 8th, 1980, so the magazine hits the stands just weeks after his death.
So people are reading his words after he's gone.
And in the interview, he's talking about the future, about being a father, about his plans for new music. It became this accidental last will and testament.
It really does cement the idea that Playboy was, for better or worse, documenting the culture in real time. But, and this is a really big but, we cannot talk about this brand without looking at the dark side.
Not at all.
Because while Hefner was in his office writing about the Playboy philosophy of freedom and civil rights, the actual machinery of the company was grinding people up.
This is where the deep dive has to get uncomfortable. We have to look at the lived experience of the women. The fantasy was fun and freedom. The reality was often control and exploitation.
And the person who blew the lid off this first was Gloria Steinem.
In 1963, A Bunny's Tale.
It's an incredible piece of journalism.
Yes. Steinem went undercover as Marie Catherine Ox at the New York Playboy Club, and her diary from that time is just brutal. It completely dismantles the glamour.
She details the Bunny Bible.
The rule book. The book every bunny had to memorize.
What kind of rules are we talking about here? It's not just be polite, I assume.
Oh, no. It was this intense, strict policing of their bodies. There were mandatory weigh-ins. If you gained a few pounds, you could be suspended without pay.
Seriously?
There were rules about hair, makeup, fingernails that required hours of unpaid labor every day just to maintain. And then there was the demerit system.
Demerits? Like in grade school?
Worse, because these demerits cost you money. You could be fined for a messy locker, for failing to smile, or for having scruffy shoes.
So they're docking your pay for not smiling enough.
Right. And Steinem calculated that after buying the required accessories, the multiple pairs of tights, the special shoes, and paying for upkeep and fines, many bunnies were making less than minimum wage.
And the interactions with customers. That wasn't exactly safe either.
No. Steinem described this culture of constant, low-grade sexual harassment. Customers touching their tails, which were attached to very sensitive parts of their bodies.
Making lewd comments, heavy breathing.
All of it. And while the club had an official look but don't touch rule, Steinem noted that the management didn't always back the women up, especially if the customer was a key holder, a VIP member.
She also noted a racial element, which is so important because Playboy prided itself on supporting civil rights.
That's the core contradiction again, isn't it? Hefner supported civil rights publicly, wrote checks to civil rights organizations.
But in the clubs,
Steinem noted that black bunnies were often referred to as chocolate bunnies and were frequently relegated to less visible or lower tipping sections of the club. The progressive philosophy didn't always trickle down to the hiring practices on the floor.
so that was the clubs.
Yeah.
A very controlled, exploitative environment. But then there is the mansion, the Playboy Mansion West in Los Angeles. The lore is that it was this paradise on earth.
Fantasyland.
But we have accounts here, specifically from Jennifer Saginor, that paint it as an absolute nightmare.
Jennifer Saginor's story is just devastating. She wrote a book called Playground, a childhood lost inside the Playboy Mansion.
How did she end up living there?
Her father was Mark Saginor, who was known as Dr. Feelgood. He was Hefner's personal physician and one of his best friends. So Jennifer literally grew up at the mansion.
A child living in an adult theme park.
And that is the absolute core of her trauma. She describes being exposed to overt adult sexuality way before she had the cognitive or emotional tools to process it.
There's one specific incident she recounts that I think just summarizes the horror of her situation.
A tunnel.
Yeah. She was 6 years old. She found a secret tunnel on the grounds.
A tunnel that connected the main house to the grotto area.
And she crawled through it.
She did. And she ended up at a window looking directly into a jacuzzi. And at 6 years old, she witnessed the comedian John Belushi engaging in sex acts.
Oh, gosh.
She wrote in her book, "I am no longer 6. I have grown to full maturity in a matter of seconds." It just shows the total, absolute lack of boundaries. The mansion was designed for the pleasure of adult men with zero regard for the collateral damage to the people living in the margins.
And it wasn't just the children in the margins. The girlfriends, the women who were ostensibly the queens of this castle, have spoken out too. Sondra Theodore, who dated Hefner in the late 70s.
Sondra Theodore's allegations in the Secrets of Playboy documentary are incredibly serious. She describes a dynamic of coercive control.
What does that mean in this context?
She alleges that the group sex sessions, which were presented to the public as these fun parties, were actually mandatory for the girlfriends. If you didn't participate, you were out. You'd lose your place in the house, your allowance, everything.
And she also brought up the drugs.
That is the most legally significant allegation. She claims she was used as a drug mule. She says Hefner would send her to pick up cocaine because she was young and looked innocent, so the police wouldn't suspect her.
Now, to be fair to the journalistic record, Playboy and some of Hefner's defenders have pushed back hard on this.
They have.
They point out that Theodore stayed friends with Hefner for decades and even took money from him later in life to pay for a divorce lawyer.
Which is true. But as many experts on abuse will tell you, that is a very common dynamic in abusive relationships. Financial dependence and trauma bonding can keep people connected to their abusers long after the relationship ends. It doesn't necessarily invalidate her testimony about what happened behind closed doors.
It just really complicates the entire legacy. You can't just look at the shiny logo and the literary awards and ignore the machinery underneath.
You have to hold both realities at once.
Speaking of machinery, though, we need to take a weird detour into technology, because there is a very strange direct connection between Playboy and the reason we can all see images on the internet today.
The Lena. This is a staple of computer science history. It's a famous story.
So who is Lena?
Lena Soderbergh. She was the Miss November 1972 centerfold. And in the summer of 1973, researchers at the University of Southern California were working on image compression.
So basically trying to figure out how to turn a photo into digital data efficiently.
Exactly. This is the research that eventually led to the JPEG standard we all use today.
And they just happen to have a Playboy lying around the lab.
They did. They needed a high-quality, glossy image to scan for their tests. One of them ran out to his car, grabbed his copy, and they tore off the top third of the centerfold.
So it's just her face, shoulder, and hat.
Right. And they fed it into the scanner.
But why did that specific image become the standard? Was it just, a bunch of engineers being boys?
That was probably part of it for sure. But technically, the image was perfect for what they needed. It had a great mix of details. You had the flat, out-of-focus background, the sharp lines of the hat, and then the really complex texture of human skin and hair.
So it covered a wide range of frequencies.
Exactly. It was the perfect image to stress test a compression algorithm. The thinking was, if you could make Lena look good, you could make anything look good.
So for 40 years, every time an engineer tested a new image codec, they were looking at a cropped Playboy centerfold.
It became an inside joke, a handshake in the industry. It's very controversial now, obviously, because it basically cemented a male gaze right into the foundational code of computer science.
But you can't write the history of the internet without mentioning it.
You can.
Speaking of the government and Playboy, we have to talk about the Braille lawsuit, because this sounds like a joke at first, but it was a very serious First Amendment battle.
It absolutely was. Since 1970, the Library of Congress had been producing a Braille edition of Playboy.
Wait, really? What was in it?
No pictures, obviously, just the articles, the fiction, the interviews, and it was very popular. But in 1985, the Reagan administration and some conservative members of Congress moved to cut the funding for it.
Their argument being they didn't want tax dollars paying for smut.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Playboy, along with the ACLU and other groups, sued. And the argument wasn't about pornography, it was about equal access.
How so?
They argued that denying blind people access to the same magazines that sighted people could read was a form of discrimination and a violation of free speech.
And they won.
They won. A federal judge ruled that the government couldn't pick and choose what blind people were allowed to read based on its own moral judgment of the content. It was a massive victory for the First Amendment, funded by Playboy.
The contradictions of this brand are just endless.
They really are.
So we have the peaks, the legal victories, the cultural dominance, the literary credentials. But now we have to talk about the slide, the decline. Because if you look at the circulation numbers, it is an absolute horror show for any publisher.
It's a classic bell curve. A huge, fast rise and then a long, painful fall. At its peak, in 1972, Playboy sold over 7 million copies an issue.
7 million.
Just think about that reach. There were only about 200 million people in the U.S. at the time. A massive percentage of the adult male population was buying this magazine every single month. It was a monoculture.
And then what happened?
Then came the competition. First, you had Penthouse and Hustler, which pushed the envelope way further. They made Playboy look tame, almost quaint by comparison.
And then in the 90s?
Then in the 90s, you had the lad mags like Maxim. They captured the younger generation with beer jokes and women in bikinis rather than sophisticated interviews and jazz reviews.
But the asteroid that really wiped out the dinosaurs was the internet.
Without a doubt. Pornhub. All the tube sites. Why would you pay $7 for a static image of a naked woman when you can watch high-definition video of literally anything you can imagine for free instantaneously?
The core value proposition of the centerfold just evaporated overnight.
Completely. And the numbers show it. By 2015, circulation was down to 800,000. By 2017, it was 400,000.
That is a 95% drop from its peak. And in the middle of that free fall, the leadership made a decision that I still find absolutely baffling.
The no nudity experiment of 2016.
It's just, what were they thinking?
This was the brainchild of the CEO at the time, Scott Flanders. And his logic, on paper, kind of makes sense. He argued, the internet has won the porn war. We can't compete on nudity anymore, so let's compete on lifestyle.
He wanted Playboy to be the next Vanity Fair or GQ.
He wanted to make it safe for work.
So they removed the nudity for a year.
For a year, they took the one thing that defined the brand and threw it out.
It feels like Coca-Cola removing the sugar.
It was New Coke all over again. A total disaster. The old subscribers hated it because, well, it's Playboy without the main attraction.
And the new advertisers they were hoping for?
The Rolexes and Mercedes of the world, they still didn't want to buy ads because the brand was still Playboy. It had too much baggage. It failed on both fronts.
So they had to reverse it.
Cooper Hefner, Hugh's son, took over as chief creative officer in 2017 and immediately brought the nudity back with the tweet, #NakedIsNormal. But the damage was done. The print magazine was a zombie.
And finally, in 2020, it died.
Spring 2020 was the last regular printed issue. They blamed COVID-19 and supply chain issues, which was, a convenient excuse. But really, the business model had been dead for a decade.
But the company didn't die. And this is the modern twist that's so fascinating. Playboy's public again.
Yes, the PLBY Group. They went public in 2021 via a SPAC merger.
We should probably explain that quickly. A SPAC is a special purpose acquisition company.
Right. It's basically a shell company that is already public, which buys a private company to take it public without doing all the paperwork of a traditional IPO.
It's a shortcut to Wall Street.
It is. And investors jumped on it initially. But the new Playboy isn't a media company anymore. It's a consumer products company.
They're selling the rabbit.
That's all that's left. They're licensing the logo for streetwear in China, where the magazine itself is banned, ironically. They're launching Centerfold, which is basically their own competitor to OnlyFans.
So they have come full circle.
Yeah.
From a magazine that tried to elevate erotica to art to a digital platform competing with user-generated content and a logo on a hoodie.
They're even moving the headquarters to Miami Beach. They're trying to rebrand as this high-end lifestyle brand. But the question remains, without the magazine, without the philosophy, without the articles, is it just a logo?
That brings us to the end of this deep dive. We've gone from the kitchen table in Chicago to the global empire to the SPAC merger. We've looked at the literary genius and the alleged abuse.
It is a story that really forces you to hold two opposing ideas in your head at the same time. Playboy was a liberating force that broke down puritanical censorship laws, and Playboy was an exploitative machine that treated women as commodities. Both of those things are true.
Here's the thought I want to leave you with. Playboy became a giant by selling a specific secret. The girl next door. You had to buy the magazine to see her. She was behind a curtain. Today, that girl next door has her own Instagram, her own TikTok, her own OnlyFans, and she keeps 80% of the revenue. The fantasy has been completely democratized.
The power has shifted.
Completely.
Yeah.
So in a world where the models now own the means of production, is there any room left for the middleman in the silk pajamas? Or is the rabbit finally just a relic?
It's a completely different world. The rabbit has to learn some very new tricks or it goes extinct.
Thanks for listening. We will catch you on the next deep dive.